in the near future. On March 31st at 12 p.m., there's an online event discussing the geopolitics of Ukraine's ceasefire talks that was just added. On March 31st, same day at 5:30, this is an in-person event, we have human rights and humanitarianism in contemporary conflict, education under occupation in Ukraine. Those are both on March 31st. April 1st, Tuesday, we have Siti Vilenki, who is our visiting history professor here. He's going to be giving a talk entitled Ukraine Between Empire and Nation, 1772 to 1917. And then April 9th, we have a book talk, Ukrainian Sunrise, Stories of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions from the early 2000s. So just keep those in mind, and please check our website because there's other events too. I just didn't have a chance to read them all. Our event today is a book talk. The book is entitled Art in Ukraine Between Identity, Construction, and Anti-Colonial Resistance. My name is Mark Andryczyk, the Ukrainian Studies Program here at Harriman Institute. Our guest today is Svitlana Biedarieva, who is an art historian, artist, and curator. She's the author of the book Anti-Coloniality and War, the Ukrainian-Russian Case, which was published in 2025. She's the editor of Contemporary Ukrainian and Baltic Art, Political and Social Perspectives, 1991 to 2021. We had a virtual event with Svitlana in February 2022, right, a few weeks before the full-scale invasion, presenting that book in particular. Svitlana is also the co-editor of At the Front Line, Ukrainian Art 2013 to 2019. She has published texts in leading academic journals and media outlets such as October, the Dallas Financial Times, and the Art newspaper. She holds a PhD in History of Art from the Courtauld Institute of Art, University of London. Svitlana will make her presentation, and then we'll have a chance to ask questions. So pay attention and jot down some questions. So welcome, Svitlana, to Harriman, and I look forward to your talk. I was moving over here just to get out of the way. Yes.
So thank you, Mark, so much for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to talk here today. And the topic of my talk today is precisely this book, which is called Art in Ukraine Between Identity, Construction, and Anti-Colonial Resistance. I would like to start with some ideas why it was necessary to publish this book precisely at this moment, which was the motivation for me and for the authors who participated in this volume, to address the topics of resistance and to address the topics of, in particular, identity and how identity was formed and shaped in Ukraine following the two revolutions. First, the Orange Revolution of 2004, and then Euromaidan Revolution of 2014. And further, with the onset of Russia's war against Ukraine. So the time shows that actually the relevance of this book is not only local, but rather global, with all the changes and turbulences that we witness now in the world, and where the topics of collective resistance, the topics of solidarity, they come to the forefront and they create some kind of a precedent that is inevitably not only recorded in history, but also reflected in the cultural and visual and artistic practices of the time. So here is an endorsement from Professor Moroslava Mudra, who has kindly written this text about the volume, and she positions in this text this volume as a product of work of a group of scholars who, according to her, are detached already of this trauma of the Soviet past and are looking not as much into the into opposing this past, but rather they look at the challenges the present presents to us, and those potential challenges of the future. While I wouldn't place this volume into this generational framework, I would rather focus on the conceptual content of it. I completely agree with Professor Mudrak that the initial impulse to create this book was to look not at Ukrainian culture in its post-colonial condition, but rather at Ukrainian culture as looking towards a decolonial situation when already this precisely traumas of the past, these colonial traumas, the traumas of the past belonging to the totalitarian space, they are not as much important as those challenges of the present. And I will talk about this further when I will speak about the chronology that I'm developing in my introduction to this book, and that the authors also address in this very diverse way, both thematically and conceptually. I would like to start with the preface written by Professor Vitaly Chernevsky, who started with very important statement that it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that for many, the discovery of Ukraine as a nation with agency, strengths, and skills came as an even greater shock than the brutality and the scale of Russia's invasion. And this is a very important point that despite all the violence and all this shock that Russia's war against Ukraine brought first in 2014 and then further with the escalation in 2022, there was this moment that particular resistance to this violence and aggression emerged, and it transformed Ukrainian society in some particular ways, and it brought the possibility of production of new knowledge and possibility of production of new narratives, new discourses, and the detachment from the entire epistemology that preceded to these processes. So as some kind of unlikely and some kind of unexpected side effect of invasion, the resistance to this invasion produced new knowledge, and it produced and opened new horizons to further development of artistic practices, among others. Because artistic practices, of course, are reflecting on the state of development of Ukrainian society. Further, Vitaly Chernevsky writes, art in particular has become an area of rich and diverse combination of aesthetic practice and socially engaged and politically informed knowledge production in Ukraine, as well as by displaced and diasporic Ukrainians. Within this development, we see two directions of movement. On the one hand, scholars moving into art curatorial work and other public activities. On the other, artists upping their theoretical engagement in a variety of projects. And this is one important point, that the cultural practice following 2014 became increasingly interdisciplinary. And we can see this in collaborations of researchers, artists, curators, and some kind of interchange of activities between them, which brings further possibility of some kind of development of cultural production. One of the book's particularly impactful innovations is the clarity it establishes in the difference between the entangled postcolonial consciousness of the early post-Soviet decades, characterized by hybridity and ambivalence, and the emergent diverse but disentangled decolonial vision that began developing in the aftermath of the Revolution of Dignity of winter 2013-2014, and continued with even greater intensity and on a qualitatively new level in the context of Russia escalating its brutal and criminal aggression since February 2022. And this is precisely something that I referred to previously, that this entangled post-colonial thinking and the knowledge that relies on recombining the narratives of the past started dissolving and disappearing, and instead a new knowledge became emerging out of the situation that surrounds us, and that refers to the history that is unfolding in front of the witnesses of this history. So the contents of the book are divided into three parts. First is solidarity, identity, and the third one is decoloniality. The authors of each individual chapters, they approached their texts in very varied forms. And so while some of them, they focused more on the chronology and more kind of conventional art historical narration of the events and more conventional art historical analysis, others went precisely into this more interdisciplinary field, trying to combine some insights into actual curatorial practice and the curatorial theory with a wider selection of topics and disciplines with which their texts intersected. So Ksenia Nuril, who is collaborating here with MoMA Museum, she's the head of programs there at the CIMEP program of global scholars. She wrote a text called Antagonism and Revolutionary Aesthetics, Ukrainian Contemporary Art Between the Orange Revolution and the Euromaidan. I must say that this text was the first that gave the impulse to the production of the book, because in 2022, Ksenia wrote to me with this text, and she asked me if I know any place that would be suitable for publishing this text. And it was this moment of chaos. It was some kind of moment of when everyone tried to do something that could be helpful to conceptualize all the situation. And of course, there was a lot of dynamics and a lot of movement in research. And it pushed me to the idea actually to create this volume. So this was the first text that joined this volume even before the volume was created, thanks to Ksenia. The text of Svitlana Biedarieva, who is an independent researcher and art historian, the mother of all things, focuses on the concept of motherland and the ways how this concept of motherland was interpreted during the times of the Soviet Union, and how this concept switched its meaning throughout the decades of Ukrainian independence. Text by Jessica Zachovich, who's the director of Fulbright Ukraine, is entitled From the Ukraine Question and the Woman Question to Self-Determination, revisiting 1920 and 1930s, mass politics, revolution, and war in today's Ukraine. Jessica focuses on the work of long overlooked Ukrainian artists, female artists from the times of Ukrainian avant-garde and particularly the Mikhailo Bachuk circle. And she traces this notion of self-determination in their works throughout the 20th century and makes parallels with contemporary artistic work that refers to the position of a woman artist in this very complex political and social situation in the process of social transformations. In the section of identity, the first text is by Alexandra Osacha, who worked as a curator at the Museum of Kharkiv School of Photography. And the Kharkiv School of Photography is a very interesting institution that actually is very productive in the latest years, and which gives a very kind of rich insight on all this artistic production focused on photography that happened in Kharkiv throughout 20th and 21st century. And her text on deconstruction of post-Soviet visualities in contemporary Ukrainian photography works with the notions of the New East and tries to conceptualize this notion throughout through the works of the new generation of Kharkiv-based photographers. And I will talk about this later, of course, already on the examples. The text by Larisa Loshkina, who is a prominent art historian and art critic, He Thinks Big, large-scale exhibitions and the identity building in Ukraine in the late 2000s, early 2010s, focuses on large-scale exhibitions, as indicated by the title, produced by such institutions as Pinchuk Art Center, which is a private institution, and a public institution of the Mistetsky Arsenal. And actually, she brings in this quite polemic claim that the process of decolonization started paradoxically and probably against the initial intentions behind these exhibitions with the work of these institutions in the early 2000s. And for me, it was very interesting how she actually addresses this topic from this angle. And I will talk about this also further. The text by Eva Sulek, who is now associated with the Freie University Berlin, her text focuses on the topic of corporeality and the body-centered practices in Ukrainian art after the onset of the full-scale invasion, and the ways how the topics of violence, transgression, and the topics of human agency, the topics of death, were addressed in the works of Ukrainian artists after February 2022. The text by Katerina Filuk, who worked for a long time as a curator at Pinchuk Art Center, and now she is doing her research at the University of Palermo, focuses on Ukrainian photographers. It may make some kind of continuity between the three generations of Ukrainian photographers from the Soviet reportage practice of Irina Pap, who worked for Izvestia newspaper in the 1970s, to the school of Viktor Marushenko, who documented largely in late Soviet period, for example, the Chernobyl disaster, and then he established his school within this very prominent post-Soviet paradigm, to the newest practices of exemplified by Konstantin Polishchuk, who is a photographer working at the front line, but he is also a soldier. So basically, has this restrictions of depicting reality surrounding him. So she attempts to draw this chronology and the legacy of these three generations. And her text is called "Ukrainian Photographers Opting for Truth: From Soviet Documentary Photography to Russo-Ukrainian War Images." And finally, the third part, decoloniality, addresses this shift of expulsion of colonial influences, changing perspective and changing relation with the topics of the past and the contested memory. And there are two chapters dedicated to landscape. One is by Ilya Levchenko, Ukrainian art historian based at the Kiev National University in the name of Taras Shevchenko. And he speaks about visions of landscape as colonial too, but also such that can become a decolonial tool of interpretation in the newest practices. So he speaks about socialist realist landscapes and the ways how they're addressed in the practices of contemporary Ukrainian artists. Katerina Butanova, curator of Cultural Escapes Basel and art critic based in Switzerland, wrote a text titled "Becoming Local: Colonial Practices in Visual Art in Post-Maidan Ukraine." And she addresses precisely this question: what makes us feeling connected to one particular territory or being local to this territory. And she reinterprets it from the framework of the text written by Adrian Ivakhiv, that I believe was published recently in East-West Journal, which was the concept of becoming tuteishi, as he calls it, and she applies it to several case studies in the practices of Ukrainian artists following 2014, the beginning of Russian invasion of Ukraine. And finally, my text, Postcolonial Past to Decolonial Future, Ukrainian Art in the Ages of Revolution and War, 2014-2024, focuses precisely on an attempt of building this chronology between the of switch or shift between the postcolonial condition and the decolonial situation, with the examples of practices of 5 Ukrainian female artists, but observe how they their working methods changed and how conceptual and thematic framework of their works changed in this last decade. So these are the research questions that I presented for the book. How has the postcolonial condition been expressed in Ukrainian culture after 2004, and how has its storiness been gradually replaced by the colonial processes following 2014? How has participatory democracy manifested within the art protest realized during the 2 revolutions? And this notion of participatory democracy was addressed by several of the authors, including Ksenia Nuril, who was talking about it in this binary opposition of agonism and antagonism, with reference to Chantal Mouffe, and by Jessica Zichovich, who spoke about this self-determination in the context of participatory democracy, and so on. So there was kind of a line going through several of the texts that was connecting them. How have transformations of identity occurred in the years following the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea? How does art contribute to the interpretation and of and resistance to the ongoing destruction and violence? What is the timeline of changes in contemporary Ukrainian art in relation to the chronology of the country's social turmoil? And should we speak in general of identity beyond ethnic or political at all? Or should we develop a more nuanced understanding of the underlying causes of unity in the face of military aggression? So this notion of identity construction, several of the colleagues actually were quite, let's say, critical of this notion per se, the use of the idea of constructing identity. And I quite agree with them, because rather in this book, we speak not about single identity, but a variety and the diversity of identities that are interacting, that emerge, change, transform, and disappear, reappear in within all this kind of social situation. And all of them, they at different periods of time, they are reflected in artistic practices. So I will try to be short here, because I would like also to spend more time on the examples. In the meantime, I have here examples of the books. So if you would like to have a look, you're very welcome. So I find it a very useful chronology, and that's why I'm using it in the majority of my texts. And this book was also built with this particular framework in mind. As a chronology of events starting from colonial belonging to anti-colonial resistance, then to post-colonial condition, and to decolonial situation. As some kind of classical ideal of framework that could be observed in normal circumstances if the war wouldn't enter onto the stage. Postcolonial scholar Franz Fanon proposed that colonialism fosters segregation, dividing the world and separating territories into compartments. And this is kind of very basic thought that should be taken into account. But in that case, the anti-colonial resistance is something that is supposed to unite and supposed to overcome segregation. But as Ukrainian scholar Mark Andryczyk, as early as in 1992 pointed out, that actually anti-colonialism is a mirror image of colonialism, because it borrows from the methods and it borrows from its perspectives in the way of how to produce knowledge and how to resist to this colonial impacts. It refers to colonialism for the only and important reason, because it doesn't have basically any other basis to rely on, and it is something that persists in dialogue with colonialism because of this. Yet it thematically inspires and fuels the subsequent post-colonial transformation. He proposes in his famous article that by the early 1990s, Ukrainian culture was already fully post-colonial in terms of its creativity, relativity, and pragmatism, developing a binary opposition with the preceding radical anti-colonial struggle. So he proposes that after the onset of all this anti-colonial struggle prompted by the dissolution of the Soviet Union and all this societal transformations, very kind of rapid and dramatic ones, it finally settled into this logic of recombination proposed by the post-colonial condition. This is what Tamara Hunderova calls transit culture, which she defines as not only a post-colonial phenomenon, but a result of post-totalitarian cultural memory. It unfolds in a space where there is a sense of the presence of the past in the present, a sense of the presence of the past in the present, and there is also a threat that the future can be a repetition of the past. And this is a perfect definition of a post-colonial condition, which always needs to negotiate and always needs to turn and refer to this elements of the past, because they are always perceived as being present here and as something that needs to be constantly negotiated with or argued with. And as Hunderova points out, this transitoriness has also to be transcended. So in the structure that I use in my books, precisely the exit of this transitoriness of post-colonial situation, of post-colonial condition, and particularly in this relation to this post-totalitarian cultural memory that Hunderova highlights, is the decolonial situation, when there is already no need to negotiate with the threats of the past or its repetition of the past in the present, but rather there is a necessity of detaching from it completely and producing new knowledge that reflects on the current and present changes. To understanding that the present is not the past anymore, and future is also not the past, but it is traumatic, it is sometimes difficult to deal with, but it is something very different, which needs different methods and which needs different approaches than the past. So the conclusion of this is that while the post-colonial condition denotes the situation immediately following the colonial experience and anti-colonial struggle, taking on all the implications of colonialism to reinterpret them, the decolonial situation speaks about the final process of dismantling of the colonial narrative and producing new knowledge looking at the present and also looking at the future. And also there is one moment that disrupts this image of all this chronology, because there is a new wave of anti-colonial resistance brought about by the new colonial war of Russia against Ukraine. And this rather anachronic element appears in Ukrainian culture together and in parallel with the decolonial expressions that are already settled within this culture. So 2014, after the experience of Euromaidan and after the beginning of Russia's war against Ukraine. And this is something also to take into account, that we look not at a very logical picture of Ukrainian society and Ukrainian culture, but rather the one that has this very unexpected and anachronical element, as well as Russian neocolonialism can be called quite anachronic. So the resistance to the war's divisive attempts has forged new collective solidarity and reunification while preserving diversity, which is expressed in social processes and art alike. Visual art practices look at the present as they mark the continuity of narrative, covering the disruptions and the body changes experienced by Ukrainian society in the last traumatic decade. Epistemic justice comes not only with the wide recognition of suffering, but also with bringing visibility to the value of what lies beyond the suffering: human dignity, individuality, and capacity to create and produce. Resisting Russia means not only opposing its neocolonial attempts on Ukrainian territory, but also preserving, restoring, reconstructing, and expanding Ukrainian culture. The new language of speaking about Ukraine and its art, both locally and internationally, should not be a language of trauma, but as a language of regeneration. And this is just a very quote that I took from my introduction. And I think this is very important, at least personally to me, to highlight, because I think that speaking, it is important to highlight that with all the epistemic injustices that Ukrainian culture suffered over centuries, and with all the resistance that highlighted these epistemic injustices, it is important to focus not only on bringing visibility to the aggression of the war, to the atrocities brought about by the war, but also to the agency of Ukrainian society that resists this war. And this is actually one of the achievements of Ukrainian cultural resistance today, that finally Ukrainian cultural production is out of the blind spot and under the spotlight, both locally and of course internationally. So going already towards the examples, I think I will need to probably be a little bit kind of more in hurry to to speak about them, but I would like to highlight some of them from the text of Ksenia Nuryl. This work of Ksenia Hmelyska, The Life of the President, that represents the figure of Viktor Yanukovych, the president who was the cause of Euromaidan revolution, and who was removed as a result of Euromaidan protests, as a figure of a saint, where it depicts all this kind of classical style or scenes from his life, from the time that he was born, when he got into jail, and that finally he became a president, taking an oath of presidency. And this work takes this precise, very ironic perspective on the development of historical development and the development of one person's biography, but a person who became this kind of very the reason for a very turning historical moment in Ukrainian in the development of Ukrainian society, and caused all this events of solidarity that was marked the solidarity of Euromaidan and precisely removing him. So, she proposes also another example from the artist Anna Zviagintseva, who created a whole series of photographs called Event or Gap, where she was taking documentary photography of the events of Euromaidan, and she divided each photo into two parts with a white line. One part of the photo would be representing this dramatic experience that Ukrainian society faced nearly for the first time in its the times of its independence, and another part would represent things as if they would be belonging to some kind of peaceful period of time, and wouldn't show any marks of or changes or of all this kind of violence that in which Euromaidan found its conclusion. And here we see the building of the trade unions in Kiev, burned. And from the other side, we see surrounding buildings of the postal office untouched. And this kind of brings us into this very ambivalent perception of the events. It brings two perspectives through which we can look at this event if we omit the other side of the picture. So the text of Ася Biedarieva focuses on the notion of motherland, and she analyzes three works, particularly the work by Vlada Rauko, which is called Longing for a Motherland. In the original title is in Russian, Тоска по родине, and she represents this motherland first being torn apart by two children who are some kind of conjoined twins with all this kind of inner organs exposed. Besides, the figure of the motherland is decapitated. And Biedarieva analyzes this image as an image proposed by Soviet ideology of a motherland as something kind of very as something that a construct that is basically faceless, a construct that doesn't have a head, doesn't have any kind of doesn't have a human face, but rather is based into this kind of violent impulse of domination. And as for me, I would interpret this image as some kind of reflection on the notion of regionalism, for example. But Ася Biedarieva interprets it from this point of view of Soviet and post-Soviet interpretation of power as aggression, and then resistance to this power as a return aggression. And she presents also this work by Katerina Lysovenko, which was untitled because Katerina created it on 22nd of February of 2022, when it was precisely the stand moment of tension when Russia was about to attack, and everybody was in anticipation of this attack. And this is a kind of an ultimate gesture of resistance, where both the mother and the son are showing a gesture, a particular gesture of protest. But beyond that, also this work carries on some references to the liberty that guides the people by Jean Delacroix. It also reflects on this statue of motherland that can be found in Kiev. So it kind of brings in numerous connotations, but all of them, they connect in this idea of depicting a mother and the child as some kind of living creatures, and moreover, the living figures that have agency. They have agency to resist, they have agency to object, and they have agency even to insult their enemies. So these are the works that some of the works that Svitlana Biedarieva discusses in her text. Further, Jessica Zychowicz focuses on the painting of Oksana Pavlenko, one of the representatives of Mikhailo Baichuk circle, and she speaks about the ways of first she speaks about how women artists from the Mikhailo Baichuk circle were overlooked historically, beyond the general overlooking and the loss of the works of the students and collaborators of the Baichuk school, and how the artists exemplified by Oksana Pavlenko were representing these precise notions of suffragism, the notions of resistance and the fight for female rights in the early Soviet Union. And then she makes connection with contemporary works by, for example, Oksana Brukhoveyska, who also addresses the same topics of self-determination through a different and maybe more radical lens. In this way, tracing this connection and legacy throughout the 20th century towards early 21st century. Alexandra Osadcha focuses on the works mostly of Kharkiv-based artists, but not exclusively. And to the left, we see the work by Sasha Kurmas from the Wasted Youth series, where a lonely female nude figure is surrounded by this stone concrete soldiers, those that can be found right next precisely to the motherland statue in Kiev. And by making this contrast of this kind of living matter with all this monumentalized and very dead and very very monumentalized figures and aggressive figures, the artist creates this precise statement of the contribution to the discussion on whether we need this to continue addressing this topic of monumentalization, and whether this is kind of relevant, whether the past is relevant for our contemporary, some kind of our contemporary endeavors. And the work of Evgen Nikiforov enters into dialogue with this particular work. And this is from his famous series on Republic's monuments, following the laws on decommunization that were accepted by Ukrainian parliament in 2015. The artist traveled across the territory of Ukraine, and between 2015 and 2018, actually. He traveled and he documented how these laws were implemented into life, either by the initiative of local administrations or just some kind of private initiatives, or as part of some kind of more communal agenda. And this is one of the statues that he documented in Poltava region, the statue of Friedrich Engels, that was dismantled into two halves and then just left in the somewhere in some industrial part in the storage. Actually, the story of this statue continued because following the publication of the works by Nikiforov, a British artist managed to rescue the statue, and he brought it to Manchester and reinstalled it. So now this sculpture finds itself again on the pedestal in Manchester. So it's quite interesting how the discarded elements of this kind of ideology of the past, they find their new life, and they find new interpretations in other places. So the test by Alisa Lushkina focuses on early exhibitions of Pinchuk Art Center. One of the examples of this is exhibition Generations USA, where such groups as REP, Revolutionary Experimental Space, for example, became prominent, and one of the prominent representatives of this group is Zhanna Kadyrova, who just in this year she received Shevchenko Award for one of her projects. And Lushkina focuses more on, she's more interested in the dynamics of organization and impact of this exhibition. She doesn't focus on individual work. So this work that I selected is just kind of just a selection that she doesn't address directly, but I hope it is more or less representative of it. And basically, she speaks about such exhibitions as Grand and Great, the famous exhibition that was organized by Mistetsky Arsenal in the times of Viktor Yanukovych, when Viktor Yanukovych was promoting this event of the baptizing of Rus in 2013. It was June or July. It was July of 2013, and there was this delegation from Russia with all the Moscow Patriarchy, and this exhibition was accompanying all these events. And the intention of the exhibition of Grand and Great was to face historical collections taken from different museums of Ukraine with religious topics, with the work of Ukrainian contemporary artists. The exhibition resulted in a huge scandal because the Mistetsky Arsenal invited the artist. They invited an artist to paint a mural, and he painted basically what he painted was a mural of all these big figures from Moscow Patriarchy, together with some representatives of Ukrainian administration from Yanukovych government, boiling in the pot in a hell. And then this work was censored by the director of Mistetsky Arsenal, who painted over it, and that produced a big public discussion about actually the place of censorship in Ukrainian society of the times of Yanukovych, and probably gave one more push to the onset of Euromaidan protests in the autumn of 2013, among many other things. So it was kind of very indicative of the situation that was surrounding both political field in which Yanukovych government operated, and the conditions of culture in Ukrainian society of Yanukovych period. The works by the text by Eva Sulik, first of all, they focus on the role of men and women in Ukrainian artistic practices following 2022, and how the considerations of both female and male body changed. She proposes that the depictions of male body became much more prominent as the depictions in the context of being a soldier or being a warrior. She brings the example of Lesya Homenko's series dedicated to her husband, which are called Max in the Army. And this this series of large-scale paintings in the human size, they represent her husband's transformation from a civilian to a soldier, with his facial expression changes, different changes in his clothes, different changes in his posture. That represents how actually participation in the resistance to Russian invasion changes not only some kind of abstract perspectives, but also it has some kind of very practical, physical impact on each person involved. And she addresses also the change in artistic practice with this large turning to the topics of death, the topics of fragmentation, the topics of rape, violence, atrocities. And she brings numerous examples. One of them is this example of from Kinder album, which is called the Burial. And we see 3 nude women who are carrying a bag, a black bag. And this work was painted in the aftermath when Ukrainian society learned about the events that were ongoing in Bucha. And she also speaks about how not only this taboo of talking about corporeality, talking about all this kind of body-centered imagery was erased by this, but also how actually art mediates our knowledge about the topics that cannot be discussed otherwise, without this kind of very filtrating lens of art, because otherwise they become very traumatic topics. So this is the text of Eva Sulek, and the text of Katerina Filuk, as I discussed already for some time. It focuses on this continuity and the legacy between the work of Irina Pap as a reportage photographer from Izvestia newspaper in the 1970s, the school of Viktor Marushenko, particularly his famous Chernobyl series, where he documented the evacuation of people from the Chernobyl zone, and the works of Konstantin Polishuk from his series The Night Watch, where he cannot depict the images of the people surrounding him, or he cannot depict the images of any kind of landscapes surrounding him because of course, all these restrictions that being on the front line puts on him. But what he depicts is starry sky with some kind of blurred silhouettes, and there is this particular artistic perspectives that he undertakes. And Konstantin Polishuk, he was a student of Viktor Marushenko, and he he takes much of this style of this kind of turning documentary photography into artistic photography from him. So, and finally, the third section of the book focuses on decoloniality, and here are some examples from Ilya Levchenko's text, and this is Socialist Realist Landscape and Mykola Burachek, The Road to the Collective Farm, from 1937, which was reinterpreted by Ladana Konechna, and it was reconstructed in different ways. She was working with this kind of deconstruction of the perspective, of realistic perspective, and also with kind of some different thematic interventions and so on. But also he focuses on the project by Katya Puchatska that was called sorry, I cannot recall how the project was called, but this particular words from the project, they represent the different types of color that the artist took from the soils of the locations where main places of Russian atrocities in the Kiev region took place. So the works feature titles such as Hostomel Mощуnumbra, Hostomel so sorry. Here I lost my Hostomel red, Mощunumbra, and so on. So basically, she was taking particles of soil from these different locations, mixing it with oil, mixing it with wax, and painting with these colors, bringing this landscape onto the canvas in the most direct way. So it's kind of a ready-made that was eventually transformed into a painting. And I find that this example quite touching because I think this is a very interesting way of working with this kind of very direct evidence, which detaches us from this idealistic representation of socialist realism and brings us closer to the actual materiality of the place the artist talks about. So that's why I selected these two examples from Levchenko's article. So Katerina Butanova focuses on the work of Alevtina Kerkhidze from her famous invasion series, where Kerkhidze describes the situation of sitting in the cellar when Russian tanks were approaching the Kiev region and thinking of the world of plants, because Alevtina Kerkhidze is a very eager gardener, and she developed these parallels of between the plant invasion and the plant world, which is slow and less aggressive, but in a way more kind of insistive in when some invasive plants take place of other plants that were there previously. And she compares it to human wars. And this is a part of her diary, which consists of 13 series, 13 sheets, in which she describes this precise thoughts. And the work by Katerina Olinik, Everything is Okay Underground, it makes also this parallels between the topic of death in human world and how death can become the new beginning for something else in the plant world. She, in some paintings, also she incorporates different weapons, so something like grenades, hand grenades, for example. And in this way, she makes this very ambiguous statement about the exchange of death and life, and this particular influence of it in the wartime. And finally, my text is also turning to the works of Alevtina Kerkhidze and her switch from reportage practices when she was interviewing her mother, who stayed in the occupied territories of the Donetsk region between 2014 and 2019. Kerkhidze never could visit her, but they talked regularly on the phone, and it resulted in a series of works with the general titles Through the War with Strawberry Andreevna, where Strawberry, Ludmila Andreevna, was her mother, and she was narrating her experience of what she observed in these occupied territories. Unfortunately, her mother died in 2019 while trying to cross between the Ukrainian, between the block post between the occupied territories and the Ukrainian territory. And that's how the reportage practice of Kerkhidze finished. But this film that she created in collaboration with Peter Raminovsky, and is called Invasions 1, 2, 3, begins with the grave of her mom, where the artist narrates her story just next to the grave in the graveyard, and then she shows all the damage and all the destruction that Kiev region suffered after the invasion of Russians in the spring of 2022. And what is very special from this film, that is 360 degrees, and the viewers are free to look at the scale of destruction, or at the people whom the artist is resisting in dialogue, whom she interviews, or just to look away to the trees, to some kind of undamaged buildings, to the sky, and not presumably not to see the scale of the destruction. And this kind of freedom, that in fact is just imaginary freedom, because anyway it returns us to this atrocity, is something very particular for this change between the post-colonial condition, when there is this ambiguity, and the decolonial situations when the things come to the plain light, such as Russian colonialism eventually came to the plain sight with the onset of the full-scale invasion and Ukrainian resistance. And the final example is Zhanna Kadyrova's project Untitled, which between 2014 and 22 experienced several transformations. Originally, it was a wall of the factory that was cut in the shape of Ukrainian map, with a piece of representing Crimea lying apart. It was burned from one side, and from the other side it was carrying Soviet wallpaper, kind of yellowed Soviet wallpaper. In 2022, the artist began adding the actual rubble and pieces of shrapnel from Russia's attack on Ukrainian cities. In this way, turning it also to some kind of testimony to the aggression that is ongoing, not only in this kind of abstract sculpture based on some kind of quite abstract statement of detached occupied Crimea and Ukraine under attack, but also with all these ready-made objects that actually bear evidence to the damages experienced by Ukrainian cities daily. So this is the final part. Just I wanted to mention about another book, that is this book. It just arrived to me before I left Mexico City for New York, so it just arrived like 3 days ago. And if you would like to have a look, it's also the option. And this is my monograph on decoloniality and war, the Ukrainian-Russian case. There I depart a little bit from our historical analysis, and I go to a more general cultural studies with some kind of elements of discussing some examples from literature and theater and kind of more general cultural field. But there I tried to outline some kind of theoretical framework that a format of an edited volume wouldn't allow me. So this is a monograph that is based more on theoretical statements rather than addressing some kind of extensive case studies. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Svitlana. Yeah, I think this book is it's thank you for going through and setting it up for us and giving us some examples. I think this will be a hugely important text for Ukrainian studies. It's great that you're taking on visual artists. Not enough going on. We were just talking about that with Cindy the other day. It's important that you have. So I think this will be a foundation for students and scholars studying Ukraine. And the fact when you're introducing the authors, it's great to see authors that are, although most of them I think are from Ukraine, but there seems to be international connection. People are in Italy, Germany, Switzerland, Mexico, and the fact that these articles are in English, that this kind of epistemic injustice can be addressed through these articles. I want to open up the floor to questions. I have one for you myself. A lot of the book in the setup, and even at the end here, we're talking about this progress from postcolonial to decolonial. And yeah, I certainly agree with a lot of that you're saying there. One question I do have about that, if we're looking at the postcolonial, right? And you mentioned Marko and we look at what was happening in the first days of independence, right? In the first years of independence, 1990s. And how do we look at what was going on then? And I like how you said that, things that were addressed then are no longer, there's no need to address that now, that it's kind of gone beyond that already, right? And that some of the destruction that was necessary then is not necessary now. But I also think that that period did a lot of things that this decolonial period is doing. This idea of resilience, forming communities was exactly what I think a lot of, and I'm talking more about literature because that's my field and visual art, but even where it crossed into and I had in contact with it, I think a lot of that was happening there in the 90s. A lot of these things that can characterize art from Orange Revolution and Maidan and the full-scale invasion, I think it was happening there too. It's just that Ukrainian artists are even more marginalized back then. There wasn't an audience, as big an audience for it yet. I think there weren't enough people ready to look at Ukrainian art. Whereas now there are. But I think a lot of the practices that were happening there were always there, and that it kind of helped pave the way of what's happening now. Now that there was more of an audience for this and more interest in this. So I don't know. Do you think there's any value of this post-colonial work that was taking place before we moved on to this new phase?
Well, undoubtedly, of course, each time period brings its value, and what I mean when I speak about the decolonial situation is that there is this particular turn of events when there are too many events that are unfolding at the same time, and then there is first the necessity of recording them, and then of course there is the necessity of interpreting them. And this interpretation might or might not rely on previous findings and previous examples from both from culture and previous historical experiences, and it might make parallels or not make parallels with the dramas. But what is important, I think, in this case is that it is not anymore the discussion of the colonialism of the past or the impact of the previous historical traumas of previous memory or preceding memory, but it is something that is addressed as if new because the situation has changed. And it's always, I think, kind of a challenge to see whether there is this limit of where is this limit to which we can address the past without, or to which you can bring the past, to which extent it repeats actually, to which extent is the violence of today the repetition of the violence of yesterday, or maybe it is some other type of violence and it needs other means of resistance. So I think that in speaking about the colonial situation, I rather would focus on the production of new knowledge through recording of the events of unfolding and of the history that is currently in the making. Because if we don't record this history, then how we can even analyze it if really we don't we don't look at the present and we keep looking at the past. So this is what I mean when I write about all this change between post-colonial condition and
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Anyone in the room? Yes,
I
please.
have a lot of questions, but I will ask just two.
Yeah, we have 15 minutes. We're a little later today with our job.
Yes, so one is kind of a larger question. So you mentioned that the volume was triggered by one person's essay. So I'm just curious how you selected all other authors. whether you just knew all these art historians or you wanted to see some specific topics in the book, and it's just appeared so fast. I mean, it's like less than basically like a year, right? That you produced the volume with so many authors. I'm just really interested in this. And then all the examples are really interesting. But I'm particularly curious about this Ksenia Hnilitska's picture of Yanukovych's life, because it kind of it kind of reminds me a little bit of Soviet art, where some artists were like it's not quite there can be like several interpretations of this, and because the pictures look like as if glorifying his life, but you can also but obviously she is making fun of it. So like in the Soviet times, they would do some kind of similar things to avoid censorship. So you can kind of interpret it as, yes, this is direct. It's not making fun of his persona. So I'm just curious, like, what generation the artist is from? Because is she influenced so much by Soviet kind of tricks? Because you mentioned that it's cross-generational, like the volume is kind of, you have people from different generations. You don't want to assign specific generation to this.
Yes, so thank you for your questions. As for the authors, I knew most of them either because we collaborated before, or I knew them because I read their texts and I found them very interesting. And I must say that there have been a very qualitative change between my experience of writing a volume on Ukrainian art in 2021, when I did this volume on contemporary Ukrainian and Baltic art. I had big difficulties back then finding authors precisely for Ukrainian part of the volume, because there were many good authors, but we didn't have capacity to translate their works, and there were really few people who were writing in English and kind of in good quality and with good argumentation. And I remember that it was quite a struggle for me back in 2021 to really to find this collaboration, which resulted in a very good volume. But part of it half of it was Baltic scholars. So, and in 2022, I discovered that actually the situation is changing, and I think it's a very optimistic thing to say, because Ukrainian art history is developing, and is developing very rapidly, and it goes beyond art criticism. It goes beyond all this kind of cultural journalism, but rather it goes completely to this very professional niche of art history. And it was much easier to find people who were interested to write, and those colleagues that I knew that they could write a good and kind of very detailed and very analytical and well-structured text. And then it was quite a free discussion about what they would like to write about and what would be their thematical preferences. And somehow it coincided in this way that everyone was, of course, interested in the decolonial approach, but also the questions of identity were important. And as I mentioned, that these questions of the participatory democracy and solidarity, they emerged in several texts. So that's how I think kind of quite organically and naturally just gathered together and in discussion.
So it wasn't originally supposed to be decolonial. It just emerged from what the authors. Or did I understand that correctly?
Well, originally, yes, it was my proposal to make it to focus on decolonial, because that's something that I started being interested in precisely at that moment too. It was June 2022 when I published this article in the Post MoMA about decolonization and disentanglement in Ukrainian art. And I was very interested in developing precisely this topic. And then in the same summer, we started working on this volume. Yeah, so but I think that there were kind of several intellectual processes ongoing precisely in Ukrainian art among Ukrainian art historians that kind of formed the very kind of connected general vision, common vision of course. And quickly about the work of Ksenia Khmelnytska, this is actually an orthodox icon that represents the jitiye, the life story of a saint. But I understand that what you said about the socialist realist component, yeah, it also is quite well present there, kind of visually, in the way how the artist presents it. This is the artist from the generation of Rana Kadyrova. So she belonged to REP, Revolutionary Experimental Space Group, and of course it is an ironic work that kind of glorifies, but kind of falsely glorifies Yanukovych, and I think that it was also prompted precisely by the situation with the Great and Grand exhibition that I discussed before, and all this events of the baptizing of Rus and the delegation, Russian delegation arriving and so on. So this is kind of this is a work that builds on irony, precisely about all this general context. Yeah.
Okay, we have questions here, and then we have to end in 8 minutes. So, Sadi, please.
I mean, it's a great volume, and I really need it for for classes. My question is about generation, actually, because it was already mentioned, and I just looked through the text, and it's mostly about this one particular generation, actually. Yes, if it's rap or Kudrada or Krita Grupa, so basically people born in the 80s. So what about the older artists who are still around? I don't know, Matthew Weisberg, for example, people like that. Where would you see them into this in this paradigm, this decolonization and colonization, or they completely outside of this concept?
So thank you for your question. I think that one of the few authors who actually focused on this was Alisa Loshkina, because she, in her text, she spoke much about the artists of the new Ukrainian wave, which is a generation that was very active in the late 80s, early 90s, and further in the 2000s, and precisely how their large-scale work, because the new Ukrainian wave is characterized by these large-scale paintings, and the representatives are like Oleg Tistel, Arsen Savadov, Mykola Masenko, and many others, and their large-scale works, they built the basis for large-scale exhibitions in the early 2000s, and that's what Pinchuk Art Center relied on precisely in their first exhibitions.
So it's an older generation, I mean.
Yes, it's a generation from late 80s. All together with Odessan artists, for example, from the same generation, and this is something on which first exhibitions, including Soros art centers that were created in mid-90s, Pinchuk Art Center, and many others, they were relying in their first large-scale exhibitions. And then Alisa concluded that actually this epoch, it came to an end precisely with Euromaidan, and because of course behind the creation of this large-scale exhibition there were several quite negative movements, such as oligarchy, such as centralization of cultural production, because typically decentralized cultural production is a smaller scale, and so on. So she built this parallel precisely between the art of old generation and the ways of presenting the art of old generation.
Thank you. And Daniel, this will be our last question. We have one online, but we have 4 minutes, so go ahead.
Gotcha. I'll be quick then.
Yeah.
I was curious about the place of artists from Donetsk and Luhansk in this collective volume. In particular, because I find a lot of the art from that region, particularly with decolonial, especially grappling with the legacy of Soviet industrialization of the regions. And because I think it's a very interesting, pertinent topic for the moment. And I was just wondering, like, how do they figure in this collected volume, and what are some discussions surrounding these artists from Donetsk and Luhansk region?
After 2014, actually, artists from Donetsk and Luhansk regions, and also artists from Crimea, they played the key role in the development of artistic practices, because many of them who were displaced because of the occupation of the regions, they actually aimed to record the situation ongoing there. One example is, for example, Alevtina Kakhidze, who was making these reportages about her mother. Other example is Piotr Arminovsky, whom I mentioned. Here I mentioned that him in collaboration with Alevtina Kakhidze, but he made quite a few short and even kind of longer documentary films about the situation in the east. About he made a film called "Me and Mariupol," another called "Masters in the Gardens," about the Donetsk region next to this zone already of occupation, which is built as a kind of a story narrated by a girl originally coming from this region, who returned to her home village where her grandmother used to live before, and so on. So while these artists, they after 2014, they were working as some kind of conduits of the situation for the rest of Ukrainian territory, and kind of bringing information, reporting, and analyzing, interpreting this information. When there was this full-scale onset of full-scale invasion, of course, everybody already turned into witnesses of violence. So the ways of documentation changed, but they turned to artistic diaries, for example. But the role of artists from Donetsk, Luhansk regions, and from Crimea, it was invaluable since 2014, precisely bringing this evidence of the war to a wider public and discussing this. So quite many artists mentioned in several of the texts, they have precisely this relation, and they have this thematic focus.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just a final question online here is about the cover. Can you shed some light, or this is Kasia, what I was going to say, it's just, could you throw some light on selecting Katerina Osavenko's painting for the cover? Yeah. Why did you choose this for the cover? Was it about the transition from colonial to decolonial, or comment on the ambi-colonial?
I find this cover very appropriate for the volume, because I think it comments very well on identity, and particularly wartime identity, and the mythologies that can be created around this wartime identity. And the artist has this painting listed under two titles that appear in different places. One is a kindergarten, and another is a cemetery garden. So in the book is mentioned as captioned as a cemetery garden, and it is actually a reflection on all this kind of society in this, under the threat of military aggression, society that faces violence, but also society that in this kind of very difficult conditions and circumstances keeps creating this very mythological stories, because what Katerina Lysavenko works with is this idea of creating of reflecting on the works on the age of mythology and propaganda. And many of the creatures that she uses in her works are actually hybrid creatures, because we see that they are some kind of centaurs, and like baby centaurs or children centaurs. And it is also reflects precisely on the condition of Ukrainian society, that particularly in its postcolonial dimension of this notion of postcolonial hybridity, and I think that I selected this work precisely because of this, because it gives this kind of multiplicity of different interpretations, but it relates first to the conditions of threat, the conditions of crisis, and possible some kind of resilience for in facing the aggression through creating of myths, and but understanding of also the unevenness of one's own identity, which is always some kind of some kind of identity where we cannot distinguish between reality of the situation and the mythology of the situation. Yeah, thank you.
Well, it's a nice way to finish discussion of the book. We started with the cover, concluded with the cover. So thank you so much, Svitlana, for telling us about your book, and thanks again for editing and getting this book out. So congratulations to you. For everybody that commented.